Okay, thanks, Fadze, and thanks, Jeff and Lenya, for a wonderful presentation. Looks like they're doing some great work up in Humboldt County there. So today, guys, thanks for joining us. I'm just going to go over a few topics. There are a multitude of topics for prescribed burning, as you could see, to cover. So I'm just going to cover a few things today, some hazards, equipment, burn unit preparation, and communications. So some common hazards we see on prescribed fire deal with heat exhaustion or heat stroke or fatigue. When you're out there working in the sun and physically exerting yourself, it's not difficult to get heat exhaustion or the more extreme case of heat stroke. So you want to be aware of what that looks like in yourself and other folks, and get in the shade when you can. You don't have to be in the sun all the time, and just be aware of what that looks like so you can mitigate those sort of things. So with poison oak, that could be something that could be a problem when you're doing burn unit preparation, when you're sort of clear vegetation for your fire breaks or your fire lines, or even during the burn. If you're burning poison oak, those oils can get into your system and really cause problems there. So you want to be aware of where that is and watch out for that. Things like snakes, ticks, and bees are always going to be on the landscape, so just be aware of those. And if you see it, make sure everybody else knows that they're there as well. And something for ticks, when you're doing your burn unit preparation, really getting into the vegetation, just check yourself after and make sure you're good. And for bees and wasps, you're going to watch out for, stepping on any rotten stumps and things like that. I've stepped on a few myself, and just an explosion of wasps has come out and just really lit me up, and it's not pleasant. So, and if that's going to be during the fire, you're going to have real problems. So just be aware of any rotting stumps or any ground wasps, and if you see those, you can flag those off and make sure everybody knows, aware of that, so that nobody goes near that. For your footing, rolling rocks and stump holes, you're going to definitely want to communicate those kind of issues, because once it gets smoky during the burn, especially if you have a drip torch in your hand and a tool in the other hand, you really need to watch your footing, because you're not going to have both your hands free to help you if you fall down. If you're burning on slopes, you're going to watch out for rolling rocks, especially if you have people working above you. Be aware of, have your situational awareness and who's below you. And if there is a rolling rock, just yell out rock, and make sure that everybody around can hear you so they can clear themselves of that. And stump holes, especially during the burn, if the roots start to burn out trees, you can have really deep stump holes that are much hotter than the surrounding surface area. So there's been several incidents of firefighters just stepping into a stump hole, even with their leather boots and their proper PPE on, they could still burn their legs. So just be aware of stump holes as well. Snags are standing dead trees, and fire weakened trees as well. You're going to want to be aware of those, especially because of the drought. We have a lot of drought stressed trees, and once you get fire in there as well, it's going to cause these trees to be even weaker, falling even faster than normally. And snags, if we get fire up in snags, that could cause a lot of problems too, where it starts, the wind could be blowing embers out of your unit across the fire line, and then branches or the whole snag could fall. So you really want to watch out for those and make sure everybody is aware of those snags. And for power line and fences as well, you could have those fire weakened trees or snags fall onto power lines and cause a whole lot of other issues there that you don't want to deal with. So if you have any snags or fire weakened trees near power lines, this is something you might want to clear in your preparation phase before you actually start burning. And your fences, they could be barbed wire or just wooden fences that you might not want to burn up. So make sure you know where these fences are, and if you have to clear vegetation around them to protect them, or flag off barbed wire fences to make sure nobody walks into them, especially when it's smoky and you can't see them. make sure you do that. For road conditions, a lot of these burn units will be anchoring into roads just to have that extra protection for non-combustible fuels. It's a good place to anchor your burn unit off of, it's a road. But you're going to have to be aware of vehicles, especially if it's a busy road. You might have to set up traffic control. And if it's smoky and if you have firefighters on the road, you're definitely going to want to have lookouts for vehicles or even, traffic stops to make sure that when you have folks on the road that we're really aware of vehicles. And every time a vehicle does pass, you want to call that out and make sure everybody is aware that there is a vehicle passing by. Certain equipment like ATVs, UTVs, chainsaws, or your gas cans could be leaking fuel or oil that could cause a lot of issues. They're combustible, and if you have fire around, you don't want to have that problem. So just make sure that everything's tight and locked down and that anybody's aware of any issues like that you can mitigate. And miscommunications themselves could be a hazard. If there's any one of these things I mentioned before that you don't relay to everyone else on the burn, then that could be a problem for them. So communication is a big deal, and just make sure that any hazards that anyone sees that you think are hazards, just communicate them to everyone around you. And the public themselves can be a hazard. They could come up and start talking to you when you're trying to do your work, and that can really distract you and be hazardous if you're not aware where the fire is or going, or snags that might be following, or any things like that. So you want to make sure you deal with the public, but make them aware also that you've got a job to do, and maybe they can go speak to somebody else that isn't as engaged as the fire as you are. And some other common hazards might be glass or metal objects. We're, living in the Sierra Nevada where there's been a lot of mining operations, so you will see a lot of things like that in the landscape. To be aware of those. And then dehydration, definitely stay hydrated and take your breaks and get your meals and get in the shade and out of the smoke when you have to. Just because it's smoky doesn't mean you have to stay in the smoke. If it's not necessary to be in the smoke, get out of it or get into the shade if you have to. Okay, I'm going to cover a bit of personal protective equipment now. I'm sure everybody's aware of what PPE is. So it's going to affect the mobility, safety, and the amount of radiant heat absorbed from prescribed burning. So we want to be fully covered, like Jeff and Lenya talked a bit about, having long sleeve pants and shirts and a hat, and that's definitely the minimum requirement. Your headwear, if you have a hard hat, that'd be even better, because that, if you're working a forested area, that could protect you from falling embers, falling debris, or even tools that people might be swinging around, or even a tool that you're swinging around that you might not have a lot of experience with. So at the very least, have a cap or hat for sun protection or falling embers. But ideally, a hard hat would be great for that extra protection. And for eyewear, you're definitely going to want that for any debris flying around. You don't want to get in your eyes, and to reduce the smoke that's getting into your eyes. Goggles are totally covering your eyes, fitting securely, and that's going to really protect you from being in the smoke or any debris that's going to get into just a pair of sunglasses. So sunglasses, safety glasses at the very minimum, and goggles are preferable too if you're really in a bad area that's with a lot of smoke and debris flying around. And here's some cost estimates for those type things. For clothes, you definitely want non-flammable natural materials, so 100% cotton, wool. Nomex is a fire-resistant clothing, but there are other fire-resistant clothes as well, like Tesca Safe or just FR-rated cloth. But definitely nothing synthetic that could be melted from radiant heat, because that will melt onto your skin, and that would be very unpleasant. So you definitely want 100% natural fibers. You want long sleeve shirts and pants as well. So Nomex is quite expensive, and that's something a burn trailer or that could accumulate, they could be shared in the future, but at the very least, you just want to have 100% cotton clothing to keep yourself safe from fire. So gloves, you're definitely going to be wearing gloves, especially if you're handling a drip torch or tools, things like that. You're going to wear them mostly all the time, and leather is pretty much what everybody uses on a fire. So you don't want to have something synthetic, especially because your hands are going to be much closer to fire than maybe your arms and things like that. So you definitely want to have leather gloves. And for the UC Cooperative Extension, I've accumulated several gloves as well that we could lend out to people for the burn, and we're starting to accumulate the burn trailers. So, but that's another cheap item that could be used. Definitely want to have those. And for boots, again, you don't want any synthetic material. You're going to want to have all leather boots. And you don't want to have steel toes because that could be heated up by radiant heat that could really burn your feet. So no synthetics, no steel toes, just 100% leather boots, and the higher the better to protect your legs from, from stepping in stump holes or from swinging tools around, and for your pants to fully cover that. So federal agencies use 8 to 10-inch tall leather boots. So if you can have something like that, that would be ideal. And that is a bit more of an investment, but they do last quite a long time, so it's a good investment. So getting into hand tools, they're going to be used during the construction of the fire and fuel breaks, during suppression, and during your burning. Also, if there's spot fires going over your line, you're going to need those. And then at the end, in the mop-up phase. So tools are used in all phases of prescribed fire. The McLeod is like an example here of a rake on one end and a hoe on the other end. So it could be used for multiple different things like raking or cutting the line. That's really a popular tool to use. Pulaskis are axes on one side and adze on the other. So you could be using that to chop up wood with the axe, or you could be digging soil, constructing your fire line with the adze side. For the shovel, that's very common as well. You're definitely going to want to have a few of those around to be digging trenches in your fire line, or to be moving debris, or spreading dirt over little spot fires or anything that escapes. A rake is great to have as well, a metal one, not a plastic one that melts. And that's going to be just great for removing light fuels and really clearing that fire line and getting it down the bare mineral soil. A flapper is something that's used a lot on the East Coast, on grassy areas, but if you're down in the foothills where there's a lot of grasslands, then you might want to have a few of those to really help you smother the flames if a fire gets out of your unit there. And these are quite an investment as well, but if you take care of them, they do last a long time, so they're worth the investment. Drip torch is very commonly used. Like Jeff was saying, they pretty much have lighters, but if you can afford to have a few drip torches around, they will help you a lot more in constructing proper broadcast burns. So what you have there is a spout that flips up, that stows inside the tank, and it prevents the ignition fuel in the tank. So you have the nozzle and the wick at the tip, and you're going to light that wick, and you're going to, once you tilt it, like in the photo here, then all the fuel is going to start to drip out, and you can control the flow with a nozzle, how much fuel is dripping out. And if you're just putting little dots on the ground, then you can do that. But if you want a bit more fuel to where you're going to create lines, you could do that as well. And you're definitely going to want to be wearing all your PPE while using a drip torch, and ideally have a tool with you as well. And This could be challenging as well when you're trying to burn. You don't want to burn yourself, of course, and then you really want to watch your footing as well because you're trying to go through all this brush and thick landscape and burn it at the same time. And if you have a couple drip torches, if you have somebody else working at the same time as you want to make sure you're staggered and to make sure that what you're lighting on fire isn't going to be racing towards that other person, lighting them on fire. And these are quite costly as well, but once you get them, they do last a long time, and if you maintain them, and they're a good addition to any burn trailer. And of course, if you have chainsaws and drip torches, you're going to need gas cans. And the mixture is about 50-50 for diesel and gas for the drip torches. And you could have different gas cans for your chainsaws as well. And you might want to have several of those staged around the burn unit just so you're ready to refill those so you don't have a huge interruption in burning. And you want those to be metal, not plastic, just so they're non-flammable. And backpack pumps are the most basic water source you can have. And you're going to want to have those to hold a line. Like if you got fire creeping towards your fire line and potentially going over it, you can just wet down your line to make sure that fire doesn't cross it. And in a mop-up phase at the end of the fire, that can really help you ensure that any smoldering or creeping fire is not going to pick up when it gets windy again. You can really put that out. And of course, these little backpacks can reach areas that trucks and ATVs can't. And they hold about 5 gallons of water, so that's pretty heavy. So you might want to switch out the duties for, you don't want one person carrying that all day long. Or you could just stage them, just have them laying on the ground all around your burn units and just pick them up whenever you think they're going to be necessary. They do have soft and hard bladders. Some are more comfortable than others. And you're going to want to use 2 hands like the photo shows there to use those. And they have 2 different modes. One is for spraying versus a stream, depending on what you're trying to do. And those could be a little costly as well, but they're a worthy investment if you don't have access to fire engines or water tenders or bigger pumps, things like that. Chainsaws are going to be absolutely necessary when you're doing your burn unit preparation. I'm going to use those to cut down trees, branches, dead snags, or to create brush piles. You're going to want those. You could use those prior to the burn, but you could also use those during the burn. You know, if there's a snag on fire and, you know, wind's picking up and starting to burn embers from that top of that snag out of the burn unit, somebody could drop that. A skilled person could take that snag down and make sure that you don't have that problem. So they're going to be essential to clear fire breaks, to get down problem trees as well. But yeah, they're going to be helping you reduce that spot fire potential as well. And of course, with chainsaw operations, you're going to be wearing your full PPE, like all the things we mentioned before. But in addition, you're going to be wearing some leather chaps as well, because there's, you know, many instances where you could just slip and they could go right into your leg or whatever. So you definitely want to have somebody that knows what they're doing with the chainsaw and make sure they're wearing all their personal protective equipment as well. And there could be flare-ups as well from chainsaws if you have any spitting or spouting from the chainsaw. So just make sure that those are maintained well. And that's going to be a different type of fuel for those. So you're going to want to mark those gas cans and containers differently from your burn torch fuel. And those, of course, are quite expensive as well. So those could be part of a burn unit trailer, or if those somebody personally has those, they could bring those. And that would be a great addition to any prescribed burn association. Pumper units are a bit more advanced once we get going on creating prescribed burn association. We could start investing in things like these 200-gallon skid sprayers, which are mounted into a tractor, or into the bed of a pickup truck. They're quite expensive, but they're definitely, could have 100 meters of hose to really, if you don't have a hose light like a traditional prescribed burn might have, miles of hose or hundreds of meters of hose going around the entire unit, just charged with water ready to go. But of course, most folks aren't going to have that. So the next step up might be a 26-gallon or 55-gallon or 200-gallon skid sprayer that are just ready to go if your little backpack pumps aren't enough. These would be the next step up from that. And the smaller ones could be more appropriate to put on ATVs and UTVs, and the heavier ones, you'll need a pickup truck to transport those. But the 55-gallon ones could be moved by a couple people. Burn trailer, like Jeff and Lenya alluded to, this is as we get more established for the PBA, we can start accumulating more gear just so that folks don't have to worry about bringing all the gear. We've got it ready to go. And it's a great place to store it as well. And it could be moved to different properties and locations to implement these burns. And, depending what you have, if you have ATVs or UTVs or skid sprayers, you want to make sure that the burn trailer is big enough to fit all those tools. And those are quite costly as well. So that's something that grants in the future are going to help us accumulate. So as we get into burn unit preparation and layout, you're going to really want to look at the landscape in detail before you start laying out your burn unit. You're going to want to look at the topography, observe the weather trends, which way the wind blows, and so you can anticipate any fire behavior, and then you can construct your fire line and lay out your burn unit after you've analyzed what sort of landscape you're in. And some considerations would be that you're going to want to use natural or pre-existing anchor points like a road. If you could use that as an anchor point to build off your burn unit from, that's going to help you quite a bit. That's just less line that you have to construct, and then the surface it's not going to burn. So it's a good place to hold the fire and to construct your fire line from. So if you're going to need for strategic pre-treatment of fuels near your resource values, like legacy trees or structures, any buildings you want to protect, just make sure you can totally exclude those from your burn unit. But if those are going to be inside your burn unit, you're going to maybe put some extra protection, dig line around those specifically. Or if it's a structure, you might want to do a lot of extra things to make sure those things don't get fire on them. So you're going to want to consider the ignition phase, the holding phase, and the mop-up phase when you're constructing your fire line and you're creating your burn unit. This is really going to help you understand that even in the mop-up phase, if you're down in the middle of a valley, that's not a good place to construct your fire line. Might be better to have it up on a ridge where it's easy to protect, And smoke dispersion, you might want to figure out where the prevailing winds are and where the smoke's going to go and where the embers are going to be flying. So this is something to consider before you begin your burn unit layout and prep. So when you begin constructing your fire line, your containment line, you want to have a few considerations as well. You want to consider what fuel type you're in an arrangement. Is it a grassland, an oak woodland, or is it a pine forest? They're all going to burn differently at different intensities. So you want to be aware of that and constructing your line, how wide your line's going to be. And is your line, away from those fuels far enough to where those fuels aren't going to be throwing a bunch of spot fires over your line. The topography, like ridges and drainages, are very important to where you could be constructing your line. It's better to have it on a ridge than maybe down in a canyon where you're going to have more extreme fire behavior. So the fire behavior and weather are important. The heat from your vegetation, you want to make sure that you consider these things. And the infrastructure like roads and resources, you want to consider those, because if the less work you have to put in, the better. So if you can use non-flammable surfaces like rocks or water sources or roads to be part of your fire line, then that'd be great. That's just a lot less work you have to do to get that fire line in there. And it should be anchored and complete. It should be one full circle or whatever the shape is. It could be fully complete. You don't want any gaps in there where fire can escape easily. And containment lines can be constructed in many different ways. They could be the roads or skid trails. They could be hand lines, or about 3 feet wide. Dozer lines are a lot wider. If you have a lot heavier fuels and if you have access to those heavy equipment, those are great to have. Wet lines, if you're in a grassy area where you can just make sure all of that's wet, and that could be a good protection as well. You don't have to dig down to mineral soil. You can just wet out the vegetation to make sure fire doesn't get past that. Or you could use a mower to get the grass down to a low enough level to where you're not going to have a higher fire intensity to get past that area. Or you could use a grazed line if you have animals. That could really help you to create another fire line just in a different method. And you're going to definitely want to use any natural features, like I said, like creeks, lakes, roads, rocks, just anything you can include in there to tie into your line construction to make it, make those non-flammable surfaces fireproof, just to make sure nothing's getting past your line there. So the typical construction would be digging down to bare mineral soil so that there's nothing to burn there, and only create it as wide as necessary, about 3 feet, depending on your fuel type, the fuel load arrangement. So some other considerations will be like if your burn unit is on a slope, you want to watch out for snags that might be on fire that are going to fall down slope across your fire line. And if you're going to have burning materials upslope, there's a lot of rolling materials that are on fire that could be coming down. So you might want to create a fire line constructed with trenches like it shows here, so that any rolling burning material is going to be caught in those trenches. So you'll have a lot less to worry about spot fires and things like that. Erosion control and post-fire rehab, something to consider as well. After the fire's out and you get a rain come through, that could create mudslides and landslides. So in the mop-up phase, you want to clean up your fire lines and make sure that you account for any potential, damage to the soil that could happen from that. As we get into communications here, this is going to be something that everybody's going to be expected to do. Before we go out and do any kind of work, we're going to have a briefing. And if somebody wasn't at the briefing, we're going to make sure they get briefed. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we're going to have an after action review as well to make sure we debrief on how things went during the day. And if you see a hazard, like the ones we mentioned before, make sure you communicate those to others. If you see something, say something. Even if you think it's stupid or you think it's obvious, it doesn't matter. You could still say it just to make sure folks know what's going on. And acknowledge other folks' communications. If they tell you there's bees there, make sure you let them know that, yeah, you saw that and you're aware of that as well. And if you don't know something, then of course you can ask about that. Radios are great to have once we get at a larger scale and more advanced prescribed burns, and folks are more spread out. We're definitely going to want to have some radios. And when folks can't see each other, there might be folks burning on one side here. You might have a spot fire over here. So you're going to want to have a lot of communication there, so folks over there can know that they need to stop ignitions while we try to handle this spot fire over here. So you know, in the beginning, you know, it'd be great to have a couple folks have those, but eventually we want to have each crew or each team carry those, and everyone should know how to operate those. And we want to all work on the same frequency, of course, and we want to check those before we start any operations to make sure they're functioning. And you could have extra batteries as well in case they die, which they often do.
Mark, if you can wind up in 4 minutes, please.
Okay, sure. And vegetation and terrain, of course, can block your transmission for those types of things. So you're going to be aware of that. You might lose your communications. And those are quite expensive as well. So that's something more advanced PVA is going to have eventually. And as we were talking about burning on the road, you're going to have burn signs because they're going to be for traffic control to make sure that folks aren't calling 911 on you to, you know, just to let them know that you got a prescribed burn operation going on here. And yeah, and definitely make sure that traffic slows down because there could be firefighters on the road. So those are great to have as well. A medical plan is good to have. You definitely want that. And some key things to know are where is the location of your burn so you know what to tell them when you call them. And where are you going to meet these medical personnel because there could be a lot of dirt roads or it could be very difficult for them to find. So you might want to actually go out and meet them somewhere. And everybody should know, you know, what's the level of care and where is the nearest medical facility and what's the response time for the ambulance. And if it's too far, it might be actually better for you to transport that person to the hospital than waiting for the ambulance to get to you. And make sure the sheriff's office is aware of your prescribed burning operation as well. And lastly, for the AARs, for the after action reviews, that's something that's great to do at the end of the day. So you can talk about what did and what did not occur and why. You know, this isn't the opportunity to blame people. This is the opportunity to leave with the, you know, the strong desire to approve your proficiency and talk about the great things that you learned and maybe some hazards that you didn't see. And you're gonna do that immediately after the event, so everything's fresh in folks' minds that they can talk about. And you're gonna focus on the what, not the who. Like I said, we're not trying to blame folks. We're just trying to focus on what went right, what went wrong, and what we could do better next time. And of course, everyone should participate that and have a voice on that. And we're gonna want to end that on a positive note so that we can start the next operation on a positive note as well. And like Lenny and Jeff said, every burn is a training burn. Even if you're a beginner or a fire professional, there's always something to learn. So this is a chance for the community to come together, more cohesiveness, and to learn as much as you can. So, all right, with that, that's all I've got, Fadze. Thank you very much.